So to carry on where we last left off, they were having a debate about the races of people, and of course, it was leading off to the ancient Egyptians. And so let us see what they have to say before they get back to the main topic.
Yeah, what do you think about all this, Radio? I'm just giving my opinion. What do you think?
Well, first of all, okay, well, the root of their problems, okay, uh, it goes back, it goes way back, okay, because because if America had paid reparations, slave reparations, which I know is not going to happen, okay, if they had paid reparations and gave black people a chance to, build their own community, have their own town, their own cities, their own everything, to be independent, okay,
like an ethno state,
slums, okay,
So before the racist guy jumps in and starts muddying the water so that he can make the other guy seem equivalent to him, let us talk about how important what he's saying is. He's saying that had the government of America given the reparations that was once owed, and then the government could operate still over everybody who is American, and then they could build their own communities in a way that would uh, still make sense today, in a way that probably all of the problems that African Americans have today would probably have disappeared. I mean, think about all the problems African Americans have had over the years, redlining, all of these things, and they're still one of the most powerful bodies of people in the world. So imagine if they had started like the rest of the other Americans, they probably would be ahead of everybody else. That is what he's talking about. But he's going to be led in the wrong direction by somebody who is being, let's say, not real about the way he talks.
A lot of these problems will not be going on.
Is that what you want, like an ethno state? Is that what you're looking for?
Okay, all right, back to the subject.
No, that's a serious question.
No, I'm asking a serious question. You want reparations to build your own towns. Do you mean like an ethno state? Like,
so of course, this does not mean what they are implying. Building your own towns does not necessarily mean that you want to create an ethno state. For those of you that don't know, an ethno state is a state where only one ethnicity is allowed to enter. Well, at least that's their interpretation of the alt-right, is a place where no one else can enter. But most African American areas that were built up were not operating like this, that were set up. So this idea that that's what he means, like no one from anywhere else is allowed to come in, is something that they are putting onto him. And of course, that would, in fighting against white supremacy, to be able to isolate yourself for a while would be ideal. But he does not realize, he's not going to realize that that is not the question that they're asking. They're basically asking, do you want to separate yourself from the other races forever? This happened to Trevor Noah when he had another guest on who didn't necessarily understand what people are going to say with that type of information, where where black people are talking about integrating with the white supremacist system is not the most beneficial thing that could happen. For example, let's take Ghana, for example. If they said we're shipping 10 million white people into Ghana, but we're going to make sure that it's half the system of Ghana and half the system of whatever Western country they pick, the reason why that would not be a great idea is because that would come with some white supremacist ideals. Whereas if they shipped 10 million white people and they had 10, like the population of Ghana, right? But it was still operated like Ghana with no white supremacy in there, that would be a whole lot different. And so they can take the criticism of integrating in a white supremacist state is not a good idea because you just become a white supremacist yourself. Rather, they take that to mean that black people want an ethno state.
Wakanda, but like in America. So you're like, we get this state, it's ours, no whites allowed. Is that something you'd want?
So the movie Wakanda Forever, whatever the hell, had just come out, and that's why they keep talking about this. That's why it seems dated, this reference. But the reason why before he snickered was because he was like, oh, he's making an African American point, so let's laugh at that. Now that he's making a point that he agrees with about the whole ethno state and stuff, he's using the word Wakanda with no laughter, no nothing, just straight saying it the way he did. Again, tells you which side he's really on, even though he's going to pretend to be like, oh, I'm in the middle, I'm just a normal person.
Yes, that would be great.
Oh, so you're
Yes.
pro ethno states. Okay, cool. I just want to.
Okay, but we know that, but the reality is that's never going to happen. Okay, that is never going to happen. Okay.
Just in case anybody doesn't know why ethno states don't work, let me first tell you. So the continents were ethno states. Like the Americas were for Americans. The Africa was for Black Africans. Europe was for Europeans. The Middle East were for Middle Easterners. East Asia were for East Asians. And guess what happened? People started moving. Not 400 years ago, not 300 years ago, not 700 years ago, thousands of years ago. People just keep moving. Human beings move. That's what we do. And if you isolate us, we will eventually go. There might be better stuff on the other side of those mountains, and we will go and eventually check. Meaning that no matter how long you can keep your state for, eventually somebody's going to come up with a bright idea of going there and checking if they have better stuff than we do. And then when that happens, there will be forced integration. This has happened thousands of times in the world. I'll give you an example, a recent example. So Japan used to be a place that was very open to foreigners. In fact, not only were they open to foreigners, they liked the idea of novelty, new things. And when in Japan, Europeans and Africans and all these type of people landed, this is why you have Buddhism and all these other things in Japan. People, they were very open to people coming into their country. And then the Europeans spoiled it, and everybody in Japan pretty much realized that the Europeans did not have good intentions, especially with their religion, Christianity. And so the Japanese closed themselves off from the rest of the world. This seemed like a great idea, right? Europeans are now restricted to their own lands, and Japan is safe. This lasted for a couple hundred years. This is why the Edo period is one of those interesting periods, because it feels so ancient because it was isolated compared to the rest of the world. While in Africa, they were starting to have guns, trains, all these things that are basically what was happening in the rest of the world. Japan remained isolated. And so places that should have been moving at the same direction at the same time, they looked completely different from one another, which is why if you go and look at Africa in the 1800s and compare it to Africa before that, it looks very different. You cannot tell really the difference between a lot of places in Africa in the 1800s and the 1900s and then later. But in Japan, the same thing happened, because even though they had isolated themselves from Europeans for a long, long time, and successfully so, Europeans and Americans were now in a position where they could force Japan to open their borders. And that's what they did. They forced them to open the border. Japan did not want to be part of the wider world. They had isolated themselves and said, no, we just want to be Japan. And of course, if you go and look at Japan, some videos from Japan, they look so ancient in a way. And then they change dramatically, because in the 1800s, with Matthew Perry, they eventually opened up Japan for trade and basically brought in their own cultural things inside of Japan. Things like, basically Western ideals, trains, all these types of things that finally made it. A shift started happening, and Japan started realizing that isolation was not the way to go. And because of a lot of pressures from the West as well, they decided that they needed an empire. And then they went the other direction of collecting civilizations. And of course, we all know how that ended for them as well. But again, isolation only works for a while because there will always be people on the outside slowly taking their time until they go, okay, now they're weak enough, let's go in there. Whether you talk about North Korea, whether you talk about, it doesn't matter where you're talking about, eventually somebody's gonna want to come in, and so it will never work.
Okay, I mean, because okay, we are dealing, we have a world problem here. Okay, we have people from the Middle East, people from Asia migrating everywhere. Okay, and it just, like nobody can stay still these days.
So basically, he has just explained what I just explained. Nobody can stay still these days, but I would argue that nobody could stay still back in the day. Nobody was ever able to stay still because it's a matter of resources.
Because you got people, you got the world population is growing even more and more. Okay, and you got people, you have these corrupt leaders, okay, who want all this land to themselves, and they want to get certain people out, and when they get those people out, they go elsewhere. Okay, and they create problems for other people. Okay, so I mean, it's not just black people. Okay, I pretty much it's a problem with everybody. Okay, now it would be nice.
So I think from what he just said, you can tell that he views the idea of a closed society, or a society where at first you have some joined identity in order to further your ideas or further the way you're living. But he realizes that the reality is that we live in a global society, and that's what's going to continue for the rest of time. But of course, they're not done with the whole ethno state thing because that's their agenda.
If black people, if we had our own spot, okay, or black Americans, if we had our own spot, and we was able to prosper, without the distraction or interruption of anybody else, okay, that would be great. Okay, but the reality is,
you won over the entire crowd.
Unless some type of divine providence could come.
So if you didn't hear the racist guy, he said you won over the entire crowd. Now the reason he's saying that is because he knows his entire audience is made up of racists who wanted ethno state, and so the idea that this guy is saying that black people should have their own spot, he's equivocating, or he's making an comparison to what he thinks is an ethno state. He doesn't even realize that the guy's not talking about that. He's probably talking about something closer to things that have already happened in America, but then were crushed because there's always interruptions.
For the entire crowd, dude. I'm serious.
I actually.
You should work together with the alt-right. I think you guys would be down to help each other out. Go ahead,
Weibo, are you an anti-identitarian?
I don't like having other people's perceptions of a group dictate how they view me. So no, I prefer to base my opinions off of people based on my own personal interactions with them.
So if you don't realize what just happened over there, basically they again played the game of trying to pull him into their whole thing. The other guy said you should join the alt-right and then we could work together to create a separation of states, which by the way, the alt-right today tries to pretend that they never believed in this, but you can see here, I mean, we have them archived their opinion, and they used to run around saying race realism and all this other dumb stuff, which they used to try and pass. And then when they realized that it wouldn't work, then they all ran away from it and tried to act more in the middle, like they're just conservatives or whatever. But we'll get back from that. The other guy said, are you anti-identitarian? The reason he said that is because he's a racist, right? And he believes that white people are, he doesn't just believe that they should separate. He believes that white people are superior to black people. He believes all this stupid stuff. And he tries to use science to push this. But now he's going to try and make the equivalence. Now, you will notice that at no point did Radio 1 claim that black people are superior or any of that stuff. But the white dude, the French dude, has claimed that hundreds of times on his own channels. Don't go look him up, by the way. Don't give him any money. Well, I'm glad to know that the girl is not for this idea of an identity. if she really wants to be a good person, she should probably stay away from these types of characters, and also she should stay away from using memes that are used by racist people, and she should also stay away from arguments used by racist people all the time.
And not preconceived notions based on whatever demographic they belong to. I find it ridiculous, especially since, you know, I'm a person and that's how I would prefer to be treated myself. I know it's entirely my own thing. I don't mind if you do it. It's just
And there lies the problem. You don't mind if they do it. You don't mind if people are racist. You don't mind if people have used stereotypes to judge people, as long as they don't do it directly to you. That is a problem.
don't do it to me, otherwise I will go off on you. Sorry, Radio One, I did that.
Hey, Radio, what state would you want? Like I know Richard Spencer wants the white ethno state to be in Florida. What state would you guys
Florida?
want? Yeah, that's what he said.
Of all
'Cause
places, Florida?
it's near water and stuff.
But Florida?
I don't know. That's what.
I mean, it's
Okay, so if you're watching, don't worry, we're very close to going back to Egypt. I remember this is the very last point they make before they get back to talking about Egypt. I hope.
in
that,
the winter time, but like Florida's got like red tides, your fucking storms every once in a while. It's hot and humid as fuck in the summer. Like seriously?
yeah, that's
I
where
think he was interested by the oranges.
Oh, no.
oranges. Yeah. How about you, Radio?
Actually,
If
what
you
state
could
would I want?
choose, yeah, what state?
Yeah, I would say Florida also, because Florida is
Oh,
it's
no,
more
you
to the
guys-
south. It's more, yeah,
Oh, you-
it's more closer to the equator. So that's why I would choose Florida. Now I would not choose a northern state, okay, because that's
Oh,
that's where your people come from. They come from the north, the
oh,
far north in the cold regions. Okay,
oh boy.
I love
Now,
this
yeah,
guy.
Florida.
I
Yeah.
want northern states. I love this guy. We would get along so well if everyone was like me and Radio.
So I don't want to long talk this. I just want to move on from it because, of course, this is not the main focus of the conversation. But apparently, they're going to go back to Egypt, and I hope it's very, very soon. I mean, the whole conversation about race and stuff, first of all, it's boring and generic. We've had these conversations 1,000 times, but I want to get into something more specific so we can show the intelligence. I mean, this goes back to what I was talking about. There's some topics that anybody can talk about. Race is one of them. And then there's some where they can't, so they run away from them, like the ancient Egyptian topic.
Yeah,
Oh.
Radio. I think, yeah, we was like, wait, this is taking a turn. Can I read a couple of super chats just real quick? Vidi S, $10. Why the large ancient structures like the Colosseum and the pyramids are only found in the Mediterranean region, and there isn't anything similar in the sub-Saharan African if they were the same people?
So this person asks a very mind-numbingly dumb question, which is, why in Egypt do you only find the types of structures, which, by the way, he also says the Colosseum. So what he's trying to imply is that the large structures found in Egypt have something similar going on with those found in other parts of the Mediterranean, which is absolutely not true, except that they copied some of the ideas, but they don't have a real start and finish. The ones that are found in Europe, a lot of it are inspired by Middle Eastern structures, but we'll get back to that. The question that he asks of why don't you find things like pyramids outside of Egypt is dumb, because of course we find pyramids in Nubia, and of course later we find pyramids all over different parts of Africa, and of course large structures built about the same time that the Colosseum was built in North Africa, in Central Africa. We find them all over the place. Now, the reason why this person would say this is because they don't know anything about African history, and they don't know anything about history in general. Now, I have asked a similar question, which is, if the ancient Egyptians came from somewhere in the Middle East and stuff, why didn't they build the same why didn't they have the same culture? Why is the same culture of Egypt continuous with Africa? Why isn't it not continuous with the Middle East? Why is it not continuous with the people in Europe or anything like that? Why is their language not continuous with those people? And obviously, they're never going to answer that question, because, of course, they pick the similarities they like and abandon the ones they don't. So that's why I first answered that actually the similarities are there in all ways, shapes, and forms. And in fact, if you ask most people, they will say that a lot of the things that Africans have that are related to civilization must have come from somewhere in North Africa. That's the general idea. So that means that they are saying that those two places are connected. Sub-Saharan Africa and Saharan Africa are connected, but not everything that comes from Europe or the Middle East is not necessarily connected to the rest of Africa, even though they have those similarities with Egypt.
Interesting.
Well, first of all, the pyramids and the temples at Karnak, okay, and the temples at Abu Simbel are not on the Mediterranean, okay? They are inside the interior of the African continent along the Nile River, okay? It's not on the Mediterranean. So where's that coming from?
And that's another good point, that the bulk of the religion, the infrastructure, basically the heart of Egypt, where he mentioned Narmer came from, right? The heart of Egypt is far away from the Mediterranean. Now, Egypt is considered part of the Mediterranean because it's bordered by the Mediterranean Sea, but still that area is in fact, a lot of that area was basically useless for except trade for the ancient Egyptians. Only structures started to come in very late, like fortresses and stuff, when trying to block enemies from coming in.
Okay, you look on the map. Okay, Memphis, where the pyramids, Luxor, all that. Huh?
What's the closest body
that's
of
not
water?
on the Mediterranean.
No, but what's the closest body of water?
What's the closest body of water?
Yeah, just a structure where H2O presides. I don't know. Where is the closest
Well,
water?
you have the Red Sea to the east. Okay, you have the Red Sea. Okay. So you really can't say.
But where's the closest?
It's the Mediterranean.
Where's the closest source of water for these? It's the Red Sea.
Well, first of all, okay.
So the question she asks is a fair one, which is, what's the closest body of water? And what she's basically trying to imply is the Mediterranean Sea is right there, so it's the closest body of water. Now, unfortunately for her, she didn't realize that the Red Sea was also there, which is also another close body of water. But you know what's another close body of water? The Nile River. And since that happened, she now changes the question. Because he answered the Red Sea, she now changes the question to, what's the closest body of water in which the Nile finishes on, like that the Nile touches, and that changes the question completely.
Well, this the closest body of water, it has nothing to do with, okay, what I'm saying is that it's not on the Mediterranean, okay?
It's not on the Mediterranean.
It's not a Mediterranean civilization.
I know, but what's the closest body of water?
The closest body of water is the Nile River.
Okay, and what does the Nile River empty into?
It empties into the Mediterranean Sea.
There you go.
Okay, but still, okay, the Mediterranean Sea is not the Nile River.
There is an entire northern border to Egypt that actually touches the Mediterranean Sea. Are you saying that doesn't count for anything?
Okay, but that doesn't mean that the ancient Egyptians, the pyramids, and all the temples are located on the Mediterranean Sea.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they're close to the Nile, right, which opens out into the Mediterranean Sea, which follows with my theory of an interconnected Mediterranean region.
Well,
you got to think a little bit outside the box here, Radio One. I can't do it for you.
Since you say that, okay, the Nile empties into the Mediterranean Sea, okay, and that all of a sudden connects Egypt to the Mediterranean, or the Egyptians are Mediterranean, but at the same time, okay, the Nile originates in Uganda, in Ethiopia, okay? So we can say that, being that the Nile originated from Ethiopia, okay, in Uganda, okay, we can say that the ancient Egyptians, they connect more to the place where the Nile originates from, okay, not where the Nile empties out at, okay?
So I let that part run because I think that's a important part of the discussion. And I mean that sincerely, that yes, you can make some arguments that since the Mediterranean is right there and there's been trade in that region and all of that, that people from the Mediterranean might have had knowledge about Egypt and people might have come from down there. But if you're going to say that, then you must also talk about the fact that the Nile River starts from in the lower areas, and that people have been traveling from the Nile onwards into the north. And so if what sea the river touches, or what area the river touches, comes from, right, if that matters, then you must give credit then to the fact that the Nile touches so many different places, like Sudan, like Central African countries, like Uganda, like Ethiopia. And if that's the case, then you cannot take that point without saying that those people must have played some kind of role in Egypt. Otherwise, you have to just leave out the Mediterranean Sea, because that's just a sea. There's no people on the other side. I mean, well, there's people on the other far side, but not the sea itself. And I think it would be difficult to argue that people moved more from the oceans, the sea, into Egypt than moved by land, just went north, followed the river north into Egypt. Especially since we know that the founding of the ancient or dynastic Egypt started with a southern king.
But that
That's a
is
semantic
a
issue.
relevant
How
discussion.
do you know that there was more influence from the south as opposed to the north? Were you there? Do you have those studies? Do you have that actual historical pictogram of hieroglyphics that tells you, oh, we got more visitors from the south than we did from the north?
Well, that was your claim, not his claim. He didn't claim that if a river touches somewhere, that's proof that the people come from elsewhere. I'm sure he would claim that they are native to that region. But also, yes, if you want to make the claim that more people came from this direction than that direction, you would claim that the area where the river spreads into, rather than a different sea comes in, you would say that the river is the one, since it's fresh water, is the one that's going to drive people more than a sea.
Well, if you read the famine stellar from
And what?
yeah, the famine stellar from Pharaoh Zoser, he clearly says that their ancestors came from the beginning of the Nile.
Okay, do you have
So he actually gives a much better answer than I gave, which is, oh yeah, the ancient Egyptians did claim that they came from the south. They came from the lower parts of Egypt, including the areas which they call Godlands, which is the land of Punt and places like that. They claim that they came from the south all the way to the north. They claim their ancestors came from that area. And that's not just in the famine stela, that's in many stelas, which you can talk about another time.
Okay?
this
That's where their
sourcing?
ancestors came from.
Wait, he says this in hieroglyphics, and you can translate them for us?
Yeah, I'm pretty pro at that too.
Yes,
Okay, but I just bring up.
So again, because of their ignorance of education, he thinks they basically make a joke like, oh, you cannot translate. They've already been translated. I mean, there's people have been spending the last few hundred years translating them, and they're on the internet for you to find. If you've got the mind to, you can go find them anywhere on the internet. And yes, they've been translated, and they keep pointing into the direction of the south. He's like, oh yeah, I'm pro at that too. Yeah, there are people who are professionals, and you can go check yourself. You can go get dictionaries from ancient Egypt and see if they're lying to you with the translations. They have it right there. They'll have the Egyptian text, and then they'll have the English writing, and you can see word for word if you agree with what they're saying. If you don't believe the European texts, you can go get the Middle Eastern ones, where they translate the words and see if there's a difference. If you don't believe those ones, you can go get African ones. If you don't believe those ones, you can go get others. There's tons of them. But of course, they're like, oh no, nobody's ever translated it, because they don't know anything about the subject.
I'll send him the link. By the way, I want to say for both of you right now, I'm enjoying this conversation. He threw me a text, so I sent him
This
the
is a
link.
very high-level conversation. I would say that Radio 1's point on the Nile is, in fact, neutralizing the argument about the proximity to Mediterranean Sea. It doesn't mean that he's right, but it means that we cannot extract anything from the proximity of that river to one or the other theory.
Of
So
course not.
we are back to our original lack of evidence other than what Radio 1 cites as historical facts, which are reports that are subject to a lot of interpretation.
Now, this is the beautiful part of this conversation. So basically, have you ever heard people say there are some people who sound smart to dumb people? Right. So basically, the arguments that girl was making was one that sounds great if you're dumb. You're like, oh, the Mediterranean Sea touches Egypt, therefore ancient Egyptians are from the Mediterranean. But because Radio 1 is very educated on the topic, he points out, first and foremost, that the Nile goes through Africa. And even the person who, by the way, is incentivized to not take that argument and ignore it, he Googles what the guy says. I saw him Googling. And when he sees it, he comes back and says, well, I guess that does neutralize the argument. And he even calls it a high level conversation. Before, when they first came in, they were giggling and laughing, not realizing how high level this conversation could become, because they think that it's just some stupid thing where somebody's like, oh, I guess they're black because we want them to be black and we ignore all evidence. Any point that she brings up about Egypt, he neutralizes it. And even this guy who is incentivized, who's racist, who's incentivized to say, no, they're Mediterranean, get out of here, he is turning and going, wait a minute, he's right about this one point, that yes, the Mediterranean argument, the proximity to the Mediterranean is neutralized because of the proximity that the other parts of the river has to the rest of Africa. And this is why I love this conversation.
And it doesn't seem that any of this clearly states that the Egyptians we're talking about were black, or that the majority of the population at that time was black. It seems that Egypt has been forever, as far as we can look back, a multiracial society.
So when they first came into this conversation, this guy believed that the ancient Egyptians were white, but you can see now that he's already converted to the multiracial society, which, by the way, I know a lot of people are going to take that as a loss, but there's a reason why that multiracial society thing is a victory, which is why I left Metatron alone after he stated that he doesn't know the numbers, which one is larger between the black or the white. He knows that at some point there must have been both groups inside of the region, but he doesn't know, because that is the compromise. That is basically where everybody is stuck at, because unless we test how many people were black and how many people were Middle Eastern, then we will never know exactly the numbers. If you get here, you've pretty much accepted that there were tons of black people in Egypt, which is like, okay, well, I guess we win, because the conversation starts with, they were all Middle Eastern people. They look like what the people look like today, and sub-Saharan Africans only came later. Now compare that to, oh, actually, it was a society with people who migrated from Africa as well, and we have no idea how large that migration was compared to the other ones. So this is where this guy is. Now, there's other things that could sway him into the direction of black, and as we carry on in this conversation, we might see that happen. I don't remember fully, but I just want to tell you about that part. Now, let's talk about this multiracial thing and the multicultural thing and all of that. So the culture of the ancient Egyptians is different than the race of the ancient Egyptians. The culture clearly comes from Africa somewhere. That's a fact. And then there's an addition of Middle Eastern culture, of Middle Eastern religion, of not religion, but Middle Eastern technologies and stuff like that, that come in and enrich the African population. And this is where I think people mistake things and think, oh, some people on the other side are saying they're 100% black, which I've never said that. That's dumb. But isn't it interesting that Radio 1 basically converted someone this quickly in this conversation? As much as he's being trolled, as much as his microphone is not working well, as much as they're over talking him, as much as they're trolling him, he still cuts through because of his high level education inside of, I mean, as he discussed, he said high level discussion.
He fell apart when the oppressing Dutch left. How does that square with the black ethno state?
Well, first of all, it was doing well before the Dutch even came. So I mean, that was a problem right there. Okay, when the Dutch came, okay, they pillaged, they ransacked, they did whatever they had to do, and then when they left a big mess. So I mean, that pretty much explains itself, because a lot of African empires, say, for example, the Songhai Empire. Okay, the Songhai Empire, which was in West Africa, where my ancestors came from. Okay, it was a thriving empire. Okay, and they were rich, and they had a good trade going on, and it was a very thriving empire until they were attacked and defeated by the Moroccans.
everything that he's saying right now. Again, you see when they ask him a direct question about Africa, he's got an answer, and all they can do is just go or ah or oh, no real rebuttal, because of course they have no idea what he's talking about. And when he mentions different civilizations, this is the thing, like in for Africans, you have to learn enough about African history and European history that when they start throwing things at you, you can dodge and dive, but they don't have to learn anything, and they're already like sitting there like confident about their opinions. I mean, the guy who asked the question was so confident about his opinion, even though he had no idea about what happened in Africa. I mean, look at, let's take Nick Fuentes, for example, as a good example. This guy, he likes talking about Africa and whatever happened in Africa, and he constantly says that Europeans first came to Africa in the 1800s. That's when he said the colonization started. That's when all of that started. And I remember sitting there thinking, what would make someone who has this little information about Africa give so much of an opinion? And then I go and check, and all of them are like this. A lot of people who talk about Africa have no idea what they're talking about. You talk about a continent with many countries, and within these countries, they have different histories with Europeans, Middle Easterners, and themselves. And yet people are very confident with the very little knowledge they have.
Okay, and then after they were attacked by the Moroccans, and by other traders, African tribes or whatever. Okay, their empire fell. Okay, so a lot of these empires in Africa were doing well before the arrival of any Europeans and Arabs. Okay, some African empires were thriving before the Islamic invasion, and some were built during the Islamic invasion when they were converting people, and people were building, Black Africans were building their own Islamic empires, but even those empires got destroyed, okay, because they were attacked and they were invaded by outsiders.
Now, I want to remind you that this is not from 2 years ago, 3 years ago. This is from a couple years back. I think it was even before what happened in 2020. And so this is a pretty old conversation. And for him, he knows all this information. It's been basically stored, and it needed some place to be released.
Okay, because you just don't, I mean, it didn't fall out of coincidence. Okay, it fell because it fell for a reason, and it fell because it was invaded. They let the invaders in.
So when Egypt was invaded all of those times, they didn't fall. What's the, I don't know what.
Yes, they did.
They didn't, but they're still kind of thriving, I would say, or they did thrive for a good several thousand years. Especially, actually, I think it was, can't remember, but over time they were invaded multiple times, and they also did a lot of invading as well. And none of those times did they completely fall into disarray to the point where it was just whatever. To this point, at least with the Congo, or not the Congo, but with reference to what we're talking about.
Well, first of all, when Egypt was invaded, okay, the Egyptians did not benefit from that. Okay, they
didn't.
When the Assyrians invaded, that was a benefit for the Assyrians. When the Persians invaded, okay, the Persians were on top. Okay, the matter of fact, the Egyptians they were enslaved in their own country by the Persians.
No, yes. I mean, like, that the Egyptians definitely did not benefit.
So let me jump in here. Of course, everybody benefits when they chase the other people out, and then there's some leftover stuff that those people introduce. But let's go back to the question she asked. She asked, why didn't Egypt fall when invaders came in? And the answer to that is that they fell, obviously, many times. Let's start with the very beginning. Narmer destroyed the north. He was a southern king that destroyed the north, meaning that right in the beginning, you have a fall of a civilization. Some civilization fell. And then, of course, during wars, and you see intermediate periods in Egypt where there is massive interruption, but the people keep bringing it back. And you would call the areas, the times when Africa was colonized, intermediate periods, right? Where a certain population came and took in. And right now, African leaders are ruling Africa itself. So to some degree, it's almost the same as Egypt. It's not like the story of Africa is over. We're just done. And some parts of Africa were conquered too and still carried on, like West Africa or some other places. There are places there that were conquered and then went back. So that is a perfect comparison between Africa and Egypt because it's exactly the same. Now, the reason why Egypt carried on for thousands and thousands of years is because it existed thousands and thousands of years ago. So they had time. And just like, I mean, it's not like Europe was never conquered and then had intermediate periods. I mean, they were conquered by the Moors for the longest period of time as well. And yes, they did benefit from that colonization, but of course they wanted to rule themselves. And yes, in between those periods, things happened. And that's actually the funny part, is that a lot of these people, they always talk about how many continents got enslaved or colonized or any of these things, but then they somehow forget it when they want to like downplay Africa as like a place that broke down. And also notice how she's gone back on that thing of like stereotyping an entire nation again based on few information, instead of listening to someone who actually has information on the continent.
Yes, they did not. They
In
they
any
were
respect,
deprived.
whenever they were under foreign rule, they didn't benefit in any way.
No, they were being oppressed
They were being oppressed.
by the Persians and by the Assyrians. Yes, and that's why that when Alexander came into Egypt, okay, they welcomed him as liberator. Okay, but at the same time, when Alexander came, okay, did he put an Egyptian on the throne? Did he put a native Egyptian on the throne? No. What he did, he put a Macedonian on the throne, Ptolemy the First. Okay, so I mean,
was he not good for whatever amount of years that he was alive? Because I don't actually know how many years he was alive and ruled, but I do know that it was for a few. did he?
So I will demonstrate for you guys why Wikipedia is such a great source when you don't know anything. So, like I said, I would have hoped that at least she would have known about the Ptolemaic era if you're going to talk about Egypt. But she was like, oh, I don't know how long he ruled, because she doesn't realize that Ptolemy, the first one, only ruled for a couple of years. But then there was Ptolemy the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, and then Cleopatra, the ninth, or whatever. Then there's Cleopatra the third. Then there's the next Ptolemy, then there's Berenice, then there's Ptolemy, then the next Cleopatra. So when you hear this thing of like, oh yeah, there was Cleopatra, they talk about a bunch of people. When they talk about Ptolemy, they talk about a bunch of people. And that's why there is a book by Ptolemy as well. But that's another conversation. So when we see this era, and then you say it has nothing to do with the ancient Egyptians, and in fact the last native ancient Egyptian was before this period, and then after that they came the Romans, and then came the Muslims, and then it was basically over by this period. And that's what he's basically trying to say. And she's like, well, didn't the natives benefit? Not really, because from now on it seems like everybody started smothering the ancient Egyptians. And even that claim of like the other one, Nectanebo, was the last native ruler, it's kind of shaky, but we'll get back to that another day.
Not benefit.
Well, according to history, well, Egypt was better off that time than they were during the Persian rule of Egypt. So they had it better during that time, but they were not ruling their own country.
Okay.
I have a question concerning the 12th dynasty.
Before he addresses the 12th dynasty, I want to remind you exactly what happened in Egypt. So you have the Assyrians, right, who came in while the Nubians were ruling, and the Assyrians drove out the Kusu, or the Kushites, right? And then this is when the Saiti dynasty came in. Remember, he mentioned the Saiti dynasty before. The Saiti dynasty created a law that forbade people from the outside from really coming in to some degree. But of course, there was people coming in. This is because now you have the Assyrians, you have the Nubians, you have so many other groups from the outside. Now, this Saiti dynasty, unfortunately, had another problem: the Persians. Now, the Saiti dynasty overlaps with the Kushite dynasty, and it also overlaps with the Assyrians. So this is where it gets really complicated, and why it's laughable when people say, oh, the natives are always the natives. It's like this time it gets really complicated because you're having multiple groups come into Egypt. But let's see what JF asks about the 12th dynasty.
Do you think that the 12th dynasty was black or white?
The 12th dynasty?
Yeah.
Oh yes, the 12th dynasty was definitely black. They were all black.
Because Isiod, for $49.99 US, thank you so much for your donation. He sends us a quote of an assistant treasurer from the 12th dynasty at the British Museum, and it states, "I reached Nubia of the blacks. I forced the Nubian chiefs to wash gold." It's an inscription on the stela of Sehator from the 12th dynasty. Why would he call them the blacks and make that distinction if he was himself black?
Well, good. So now they're asking all the good questions. So to answer this, we have to go to ancient Egypt directly. So he asks the question, why would Sehetepebra, which he calls Sehator, I don't know why, but that has to do with translation. So the translations in the past, they accepted that Nubians were black. So whenever they translate Nubians, they say Nubians of the black. And they think that this translation, the person, JF, the person in the video, thinks that translation means that the ancient Egyptians themselves called them black, but that's not what happens. And we can easily read here that at no point, in fact, they barely call them anything but Southerners. They don't even call them with their traditional names. They usually call them Southerners. So for example, we can read, live Horus, divine on being, two ladies, divine of birth, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kakure, given life, gold Horus, living of being, son of Ra, of his body, his beloved, land of the two lands of Sestros, given life, stability, and dominion forever, year 16, third month of the season of growing, his majesty established the southern border at He, established my border further south than my forefathers. So you can see it's already heading in the direction where he's talking about invading the south further than Egypt has ever done before, including what his father did, which he started a campaign to the south. He carries on by saying, I added to what was banqueted to me or bequeathed to me. I am king who speaks and acts. I make happen what I conceive, eager to seize, hasty to succeed, in whose heart a matter doesn't slumber, anticipated inferiors, suppressing mercy, merciless to the enemy who attacks him, who attacks one who would attack, who is silent when one is silent, who replies to matter as befits it, for to be idle after an attack is to strengthen the heart of the enemy. Aggression is valor and retreat is cowardice. Who is driven from his border is truly a coward. For the Nubian, you will notice there, by the way, the word is Nehes. It's not even the classical Nubian, but we'll get back to that. For the Nubian listens to the word of mouth. Answering him is making him retreat. If one acts aggressively towards him, he turns his back. Retreat, and he will take occasion to act aggressively. For they are not respectable people. They are wretches with broken spirits. My majesty has seen them. It is no lie. I captured their women. I carried off their underlings, went to their wells, drove off their bulls, tore out their barley, set fire to it, as my father lives for me. I speak truthfully. There is no boast that comes from my mouth. As for any son of mine who shall maintain this border that my majesty established, he is my son, born to my majesty. It befits a son that he be champion of this father and maintains the border of the begetter, as to him who shall lose it, who shall not fight for it. He is not my son. He was not born of me. Now my majesty had a statue of my majesty made at this border that my majesty established so that you may be persistent at it and that you may fight for it. And that's the final part. At no point does it say, I chased off the black Nubians, because that would be stupid to say that. And also, he did not say. So basically, what happened is they got an early translation where the word Nubian was considered black, and then I chased off the Nubians of the blacks and blah blah blah, and then they think it's the same as if I said, if I talked today, right, and I said I chased away the Europeans from my lands, and then someone just takes that and says, okay, we know that Europeans are white, so what I'm going to say is, in the translation, I chased off the white Europeans, but he's adding that. That is not in any ancient Egyptian stela. It doesn't matter if it's not even this one. In none of them do they ever refer to the Nehesi or the Cushites or any of that as black ever. And so his question does not make sense. Now, everybody else does refer to them as black. When the Greeks come, they refer to them as black. When the Persians come, they refer to them as black. When the Assyrians come, they refer to them as black. By the way, they also refer to the Egyptians with the same color. That when the later Europeans come, they refer to them as black. All of them use that, but the Egyptians themselves never differentiate in color, except when you look at the buildings. Sometimes they draw them the same color as the Egyptians, and then sometimes they draw them as darker, and then sometimes they draw the Egyptians as darker than the other people, but we'll get back to that.
During this time in history, the Egyptians had actually invaded Nubia, and because of that, the relations between the two different people was very strained, I would assume, especially if you're invading a people. But go ahead, Radio.
I mean, the real reason was that the Nehesi were starting to move further north, taking some parts of Egypt. But go ahead, Radio 1.
Okay, first of all, when we deal with Nubian, okay, would you say Nubians look like all black people, look like all African Americans in America? Or would you say Nubians that look like all people of Africa?
So I'll address this point later that he's making right now, that Nubians, of course, or Nilotics look nothing like other people of Africa. I mean, they're very unique looking people. But I want to get back to the word that was used in the 12th dynasty to refer to the people of what we call Nubia, or that area in general. And this word is Nehesi. And you can see here that the translation of this word is south or southerners. Now, some people used to translate it as black because, of course, they said that the Nubians were black. And yes, it talked about the Egyptians. So let's just read the little bit. In his review of the Second Intermediate Period, Egyptologist Kim Rayolt proposed that Nehesi was the son of the direct successor of the pharaoh Shesi, with a Nubian queen named Tati. Egyptologist Darrell Baker, who also shared the opinion, posits that Tati must have been Nubian or of Nubian descent, hence Nehesi's name meaning the Nubian. We all know that the word black in ancient Egyptian is Kem, not Nehesi. Being related to Sheshi, who is believed to have a Canaanite origin, Nehesi is also believed to be of Canaanite descent. 4 scarabs found, including 1 from Semna in Nubia and 3 of unknown provenance, point to a temporary co-regency with the father. Furthermore, 1 scarab mentions Nehesi as the king's son, blah, 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 blah. Now, to address his point on him saying that they're some of the darkest people on earth, yes, the people in the Nilotic region tend to be very dark, and they tend to be very tall and very slender. They look somewhat different than the ancient Egyptians that were painted over there. And so, obviously, no one is saying that the ancient Egyptians looked 100% like Nilotics, and we wouldn't even expect that because there's so much diversity in the way people look in Africa. I mean, you can even take Ethiopia, for example, or any of these places. You can see that people look very different from one place to another, which is what he's trying to get at.
Okay, because when we deal with Nubians, we are dealing with the blackest of black Nilotic people of southern Sudan. Okay, those were your Nubians. Okay, so we have to make this distinction.
Okay,
we have to make this distinction because some of y'all y'all want people to believe that the people of ancient Egypt were made up of only, jet black Nubians and these Arab looking people.
I've never said that.
That's not the case.
Oh, so then we're in
Or jet
agreement
black
Egypt
Nubians
was diverse.
or Middle Eastern looking people. Huh?
So then we're in agreement
Now-
that Egypt was diverse? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yes, we can't say it was diverse,
Okay.
but the pharaohs and the ancient Egyptians, let's make this clear. Now, you may say that the pharaohs and the ancient Egyptians, the true Egyptians, did not look Nubian, but let's make this clear.
Mhm.
They did not look Middle Eastern or European either.
They'll never address the point, the fact that the ancient Egyptians themselves never looked Middle Eastern in their portrayals. They'll never address that. They'll never address the fact that Middle Eastern people, we see almost all of them, almost ubiquitously, we see them all portrayed with beards and stuff like that. Whereas Egyptians seem to pride themselves on the fact that they're very hairless.
Well, do you
Okay,
know
we're
exactly what
paler.
they look like?
Yes, I can tell you exactly what they look like. Have
So
you ever
let's
heard of the
take
land of Punt?
I'm sorry.
Huh? Have you ever heard of the land of Punt?
No,
The
I'm
land
not.
of Punt?
The land
P-U-N-T?
of P-U-N-T. Let me
So another place that you should know about in Egypt is the land of Punt. And yep, they have no idea what it is. Again, what do they know about Egypt? They don't know the founder. They don't know the final pharaoh, native pharaoh. They don't even know the Ptolemy era that well, which, by the way, a lot of people don't know either. They don't know how much there was a reestablishing of works. It was not the real Egypt as well. They don't know anything about it. They don't know about the dynasties. They don't know about the changes. And so it's like, what are you arguing about here?
just look that up right quick. Have you? Land of Punt is a trade partner of Egypt, ancient Egypt. And
Yes, okay. Now, they call this place the land of gods, okay? And when they depicted the people of the land of Punt, guess who they look like? Okay, now, first of all, let's deal with the geographical location of the land of Punt.
So, of course, the people of the land of Punt, seen here, depicted here, have the same sort of aesthetic as those in Egypt. But I want him to tell us exactly where they're from, or the land of Punt. It's PNT, so it's very hard to tell. I mean, some people say it's Penet or whatever, but we'll get back to that.
The land of Punt, okay, according to archaeologists, historians, the land of Punt was located in the modern day Horn of Africa.
around
Okay,
the Red Sea.
Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea.
Okay.
Okay, that was the land of Punt. And when the Egyptians depicted these people, they look just like they are the closest people to the ancient Egyptians out of all people.
Okay.
So before she chimes in with information about a land she just heard of, I want to first state a couple things. One, obviously, you can see here the land of Punt. The people, again, are depicted exactly the same as the Egyptians. Notice the beard of the man at the front. He's got that classic ancient Egyptian beard, the fake beard that they have. He's got that over there and everything. And then, of course, he mentions that it's in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia area, right? Which we know it's in that area, which goes back to what they were saying earlier, which is, which sea does it touch? The Red Sea. You know what I mean? The same Red Sea which they used to get to the land of Punt. Yep. This is why what they were saying about the seas was stupid. You've got the Red Sea, you've got the Nile going south, and then you've got one sea, the Mediterranean, touching. And so if you were going to use that argument, then you have to use this argument to say that there must have been more people, not to mention that the Egyptians themselves claim that their ancestors came from these regions.
So hang on. You've made two claims about two various people. So you were talking about Nefertiti at one point. You still have yet to actually provide that image. Now you're talking about the people from the land of Punt. Can you actually find me an image of these people? And I'll actually provide an image of Egyptians as well, so we can compare notes. How's that sound?
So, of course, she tries to go, oh, yeah, we were talking about Nefertiti specifically, which is going back to what I was saying. They're willing to talk about race earlier that has nothing to do with the conversation. But now that he's bringing up Egyptian stuff that she has nothing about, she's like, oh, let's go straight to the original topic. She actually doesn't know that as well, that Nefertiti has something to do with the later years, but let's ignore that. But let's go to the land of Punt. So I've already shown you images of the land of Punt. Clearly, they look like ancient Egyptians. So yeah, but the problem is Radio One is having a problem with his computer, and so that becomes a huge problem. Now, these guys could pull it up themselves, right? Because it's all over the internet, the land of Punt, but they're not going to do that because it's going to hurt their argument.
Hey,
Exactly.
So,
Alright.
did you get that image then, Radio One?
also, just real
Yeah, I
fast.
got it, but I'm having a hard time sending it.
You want to send it to me in an email then?
Yeah, send it to her by email. Hesioid, still $10. Thank you. And do another one. Thank you very much. And last one for now. Shiv Palpatine, $10. What about the fall of the kingdom of Kush, which was an Egyptian colony that was handed over to Black Egyptians and destroyed itself from the inside?
As far
Okay,
as I know,
so-
Kush was Nubia before Nubia was. Yeah, no, it was. I thought Nubia, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
First of all, okay, when we deal with the land of Kush, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I bet they're smoking weed all the time and shit, right, guys? Go ahead.
You'd like it there, Randy.
This is Kush. Get it? No? All right.
Okay, Kush.
Sorry. Go ahead. I know Kush. Just trust me.
When we
Ask
deal
him
with
here.
the land of Kush, okay, the ancient Egyptians spoke of Kush as wretched Kush in their hieroglyphics. Okay, because so you cannot say that Kush was founded by Egyptians. Okay.
So I have to explain the last part and why I played it. The guy, the racist guy, he fancies himself a comedian, and so he read The Land of Kush thinking that it was just some troll person talking, which it was, by saying that it was a land handed over by the Egyptians, but it definitely was not handed over by the Egyptians. The kingdom of Kush was independent, had nothing to do with them. One of the words that they used for Kush was wretched Kush, which I've heard some people say they called it wretched because they didn't have the stuff that Egyptians had. But like I read with the Nehesi, wretched usually referred to their spirit or whatever, saying that they basically was saying they're the enemies of the area of Egypt, which falls away from the idea that Egypt founded Kush, which is ridiculous. But not only that, Kush outlasted Egypt in the final days. I mean, the areas in the south, the Nubians or whatever you want to call them, they far outlasted the rest of Egypt up until like the 5th century.
Because they refer to it as as one of their enemies. Okay, and first of all, when Tutmosis III, okay, when Tutmosis I during the 18th dynasty, when they conquered Kush, okay, and they established colonies in Kush, okay, and then we hear of the 25th dynasty Kushite kings. A lot of those Kushite kings had ancestral lineage to the 18th dynasty, so you can't say that it was handed over by blacks. Okay, that is irrelevant.
But what would you expect? Of course, it's irrelevant. They basically make up information and then they want you to tackle it because they don't want to read the original. Think about that question just itself. Oh, the kingdom of Kush was handed to the blacks by the ancient Egyptians and then it just fell apart because black people were in charge of it. It's like, what? Why you just gotta make stuff up?
Okay, because the southern Egyptians that migrated into Kush, they were already there, and they produced mixed offspring. You know, where the descendants of that pretty much became the descendants of the 25th dynasty.
All right. And JF is JF. What do you have pulled up there? Oh, Kingdom of Kush. All right, he's got the.
Yeah, I'm just showing some images to illustrate what Radio 1 is talking about.
I honestly, when I was reading that super chat, I'm like, is this a troll? Kingdom of Kush, something like a fucking high schooler would call their fake, land. But interesting. So, what do you make of all this, JF?
So before JF gives his opinion, I want you to notice how impressed he is going to become by all the information that this guy has. And remember, this is quote unquote a high level conversation, but the high level is coming from one side. Only one person was very familiar with the land of Kush, very familiar. The other girl, she was partially familiar. She was like, the Nubian. She kind of knew, but she had no idea about the land of Punt. She had no idea about anything else really, but she probably heard the word Kush before somewhere. And this is why it's important to notice, again, they came in with strong opinions about Egypt, but they had no idea about Egypt at all.
Well, I make that all of the claims of Radio 1 are correct, except one is unsupported. This view that the pharaohs were black. it's the only one that I find no support for. I'm not saying it's necessarily false. I'm saying there's no reason to believe that based on what I read. And what he provides us is insufficient at the moment. But this guy has a deep knowledge of Egyptian history for sure.
Well, isn't that fascinating?